That's my secret, Captain.
Transformations are cool, right? Turning Bruce Banner into the Hulk, all CG, right? You create a virtual model, keyframe the polygons to shift to different positions, and boom! Mark Ruffalo becomes the Hulk. Amazing, really, and something that's only really been possible since CGI came along, say 20 years or so, right?
You're right, Mr. Morgan.
1937? But how? They didn't have computers back then. Shapeshifters have existed in stories since there have been stories. Almost every culture has tales of humans turning into creatures and vice versa. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Indian myths of the Ichad Chari Nag to the Obake of Japan, we've long been fascinated and scared by the idea of a character transforming before our eyes. So of course, when movies came along, storytellers were going to find ways to depict that cultural magic. In this video, I'm going to be looking at and celebrating the innovations behind some iconic movie monster transformations. If your favourite movie or TV show isn't included, it's either because I wasn't aware of it, or I was aware of it and just thought it was rubbish and you had terrible taste. In either case, feel free to get angry at me in the comments. Almost from the moment The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was published in 1886, there were stage adaptations. For 1913's first screen adaptation, actor and director King Baggett used a crossfade to depict the change. While it might seem a little primitive, remember, there was no instant playback or way to check what had been recorded until the film was processed. In 1920, John Barrymore opted for acting, and 100 years before the Joker face trend, scared audiences just by distorting his face. To be fair, this movie also used crossfades and tricks of misdirection. For 1931's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, legendary cinematographer Carl Struss had a different approach. He had been experimenting with panchromatic film as early as 1925's Ben-Hur, a type of black and white film sensitive to all colours of light. In Ben-Hur, Struss used red makeup to create leprosy spots, which then appeared to disappear as a green filter was moved off the lens to be replaced by a red one. If you remember colour lessons in school, the green filter only lets through green light. Any paint or objects reflecting a different colour appear dark, as the filter does not let that colour through. With black and white film, the celluloid responds to the luminance values of the image. With a red filter, the makeup and skin tones appear the same, but with a green filter, the light from the red dots is blocked, so they appear dark. By switching from a green filter to a red one, a sufferer's leprosy appears to be cured. 6 years after Ben-Hur, Struss reversed the move. This time the makeup that had been invisible was revealed when the filter was switched, helping transform Frederick March's Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde. Hang on, that isn't a mirror. That glass being raised to the camera is the glass in the hand of another performer. It's a pretty neat trick. Each time the transformation is depicted in that movie, Struss and his team added to the effect, so that audiences wouldn't get used to it and begin to spot what was happening. Like in this one, note the camera move. That's not hiding a jump cut, but is using misdirection to help hide the filter being added to the camera. And here, we're seeing multiple dissolves being used. To make this transformation work, with the different stages of makeup, the filmmakers used a second camera mounted alongside the movie camera. They drew the actor's position into the glass, stopped recording, added makeup, and shot a further second or two of footage. In this way, they could line up the actor's performance over several hours, It was a clever way of bypassing the limitations of no live video preview. The clip we saw at the start of this video is 1937's Shh, the Octopus. For that production, Struss was fully embracing misdirection. The wig removal gets the audience to look elsewhere as the filters change.
I'm Dr. Jekyll.
By 1941, Spencer Tracy repeated the dissolve trick while performing dialogue. Personally, I don't think it's as effective as the filter change technique, but the ambition is impressive.
I've done nothing. You're looking for a man named Hyde. Hyde! I'm Dr. Henry Jekyll. I'm Dr. Jekyll.
30 years later, 1971's Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde eschewed any sort of post-processing to produce this transformation. It's an incredible shot. We see Jekyll's reflection in the mirror, the camera moves away, at which point hidden crew members must have re-angled the mirror to point to another chair. Was the camera operator standing in between both actors? It's a magic trick, and a pretty effective one at that.
Pay back if you value your life.
You can go the other way, of course. 2003's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen used flash cuts to transform a forced perspective Hyde back into Jason Fleming's Jekyll. My wife and I are divided on this. Personally, I think it works at an artistic level. She just wrote lol in the research notes. I think, like the wider movie, the intent was clever, but the overall execution was lacking.
Dr. Jekyll, at your service.
The other, most famous monster transformation is the werewolf. Werewolf of London? No, don't comment, I didn't get the title wrong. I mean, do comment, YouTube likes that stuff. Werewolf of London from 1935 used a moving camera and foreground objects to disguise a man slowly becoming a werewolf. I'm just in awe of this shot. At first, I thought director Stuart Walker and cinematographer Charles Stumer devised a method of repeating a camera move for each stage of the makeup. When I spoke to camera operator Rusty Geller, he told me stories of expert camera grips moving studio cameras manually with incredible precision. So it seemed possible. But after watching the clip way too many times, I think what we're seeing here is a rear projection background, with actor Henry Hull miming walking in front. The pillars were either moved live by stagehands or added later in an early form of optical printing. I haven't found a source for how the shot was achieved. If you do know, please post in the comments. Incidentally, The Twilight Zone paid homage to this sequence in 1960 in the episode The Howling Man. And that's not me speculating, director Douglas Hayes has confirmed as much. An article for Slash Film about the same Twilight Zone episode confirms that they pulled off the transformation with a moving camera, repeating the move with each stage of the makeup. "1941's The Wolfman achieved its transformation through the now familiar dissolve technique, using etched glass to help Lon Chaney Jr. return to the pose. He got really good at this throughout the many sequels, despite having a widely known tension with makeup artist Jack Pierce. Mainly because of the required 6-hour makeup sessions which Chaney Jr. loathed. Reportedly the tension was so bad, largely due to accidents when applying the hair, that Lon and Jack nearly came to blows. Incidentally, Jack Pierce was also the makeup artist for Werewolf of London, and there were also issues on that movie between the star and makeup artist. According to the Monster Movies of Universal Studios by James Niebar, Werewolf of London star Henry Hull went to studio head Carl Laemmle to force the makeup to be toned down. Off-screen arguments aside, movie werewolf transformations didn't really innovate again until the 1980s, where makeup artist legend Rick Baker created physical transformations for 2 movies in 1981. He wasn't technically the first makeup artist to incorporate air bladders under latex. That was Dick Smith for Altered States a year earlier, but Rick took it much further. He signed on to an American Werewolf in London and had begun pre-production, but when funding appeared shaky, he transferred his work to The Howling. Then John Landis got the green light, forcing Baker to abandon The Howling. He left it in good hands with his protege Rob Bottin. That's not to say Bottin just implemented Baker's vision. The Howling's werewolf and transformation scene is very different from American werewolves. In the end, Baker was awarded the Oscar, and what followed was a lot of werewolf movies. What sets apart these transformations is a lack of reliance on misdirection or magic tricks. The subject is fully shown. Mechanical puppets under flesh-like latex distort the human into a wolf. In some ways, this is the equivalent of colour filters. The audience sees what's happening right on screen. Hold that thought though, that of filmmakers wanting to show the process in full, all in camera. I want to return to that, but first there's 2 other notable werewolf transformations I want to talk about. The first is 2010's The Wolfman, a remake of the classic gothic horror by director Joe Johnston. He's also the director of Jurassic Park 3, the man who said dinosaurs are boring, we need a plane crash. Rick Baker was brought in to mastermind the transformation, and this was surely to be his magnum opus. He spent 7 months designing new looks, but initial director Mark Romanek wouldn't sign off on anything. Eventually Romanek was replaced by Johnston. According to J.W. Rinsler in their book Rick Baker Metamorphosis, when the day came to shoot the big transformation scene, Baker and his team were not listed on the call sheet. They went down to set to see what was happening, only to find Benicio del Toro mimicking transforming into a wolf. It was then that Baker and company learned that the filmmakers had decided to make the transformation scene CGI. According to the movie's creature effects creative supervisor Dave Elsey, we said, "But we have all this stuff, it's all ready to go. Don't you want to even try it?" And they said nope. Rick was so gutted. We'd built 90% of it and planned it out, and it was very original, very clever, really innovative. Rick was honestly, truthfully heartbroken about it, and it broke my heart as well. To be fair, I don't know if this was a decision by Joe Johnston or by Universal the studio. 2010 was prime CGI is everything territory. But even if Johnston did object and this was a studio decision, the director's name stays on the movie. At the time, the production issues were not known to the public, but critics and audiences alike mocked the VFX of the Wolfman. And Baker and Elsey got the last laugh, as they went on to receive the film's only Oscar for the makeup they were allowed to put on screen. For a comparison to the Wolfman, take a look at this transformation from Twilight New Moon, released a year earlier. Over in an instant. Here director Chris Weitz has kept the effect as short as possible. There's no time to spot any issues. Of course, Twilight is more famous for another movie monster, who also has a history of transformations. Probably because vampires generally look human, there's not a lot of human-to-vampire transformations in the early days of cinema. But there's lots of transformations of vampires into other things. This hand animation from 1943's Son of Dracula is surprisingly effective, even if the bat is kinda cute. Quite different from this in-camera non-transformation in Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 version. That production famously eschewed digital effects, as the director explained that because the original book was written at the dawn of cinema,
I thought that I would not only make the film entirely in a false place, in a studio, but I would only use effects done as they would have been done in 1900.
When in human form, there's not a lot to do for a vampire to reveal themselves. Nosferatu's Count Orlok had a rat-like look from the start. And Bela Lugosi never even had fangs. Pointy teeth didn't reappear until 1953's Dracula in Istanbul, although 1958's Horror of Dracula is probably what cemented the look. Still, even then we didn't get to see the teeth grow out. I think, and I know, stand by to correct me in the comments, but I think the first time we see fangs growing is 1986's Vamp, starring Grace Jones. Terrible movie, but a lovely practical effect. If any VFX artist can wrangle both practical and visual effects, it is the legendary Robert Legato. Here's Louis' transformation in 1994's Interview with a Vampire. I think, there's that word again, what we see here is a practical lighting effect to change his eyes, while teeth were digitally hidden before being revealed. Similarly, Claudia's transformation looks to me like a morph, digitally expanding her hair into place. Sorry, morph. Have I not covered that term?
History's a little vague on who actually came up with the term morphing. Dennis Muren may have used that phrase when we were discussing what the program had to do.
The term morphing may have been coined by Doug Smythe, and we spell it M-O-R-F.
Do we want to call it with an F because that's how it's spelled, or do we want to call it with a PH so we don't look like we can't spell?
But everybody since has been spelling it M-O-R-P-H.
Morphing, spelled with an F at least according to Dennis Muren, is an entirely digital transformation. But it is back to that same appeal of the colour filters trick. The entire thing happens in front of your eyes. Technically, The Golden Child in 1986 should be credited with the first morph on screen. But, well, let's talk about Willow instead. While in pre-production for the movie Willow, John Knowles suggested it would be possible to digitally distort an image into the shape of another. That is underselling the technique quite a bit. There was no reshape plugin for Adobe After Effects. Actually, there was no After Effects. ILM's Doug Smythe had to develop the software to achieve the shot. In the documentary Light and Magic, there are behind-the-scenes photos of the process. The practical effects team not only built puppets of each animal, they also built intermediate stages. This helps visually explain to the audience what we're seeing. And the tortoise with tiger paws is kinda cute, or maybe horrific. You don't need an intermediate when transforming human to human though. The video for Michael Jackson's Black or White transformed one performer into another, and then another repeatedly. Although, notice how the performances are choreographed. I think this helps sell the effect as the shoulders and heads are in the same positions. It's an evolution of the Spencer Tracy shot, using the performance to mask the change. According to the article An Oral History of Morphing in Michael Jackson's Black or White by Ian Fales, the VFX artists developed the technique of using layers to morph different parts of the image at different times. This gave them the control to animate a change in hairstyles, so that the eyes and nose didn't change nearly as much. And you can see some of the transformations are quite ambitious. I do wonder if the original intention was to transform on the head turn, which feels like it would have been more subtle. Morphing became a staple of the 1990s. Being done in the computer meant that transformations could be relatively simple to achieve. The TV series Buffy the Vampire Slayer regularly transformed actors into the same actor with prosthetic makeup on. That must not have been without its challenges though. I can't confirm, but I think most of the vamp outs were achieved by filming the actor on blue or green screen, then having their makeup added or removed, and then using live video mixing to line them up in their previous poses before filming again. The Buffy VFX team clearly knew what so many other artists learn.
Keep your shots short, and that way any flaws are harder to spot. That rule can be ignored, of course, when you have movie production time and the resources of Weta.
In 2002, The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, actor Bernard Hill performed the same moves under 4 different stages of makeup. This leads to an incredibly subtle transformation, as the digital team de-aged and de-cursed Theoden. It's almost just a series of fades, but enhanced by combining it with morphs to help fix any discrepancies in the alignment or position of Hill's facial features. Like Lon Chaney Jr.'s Wolfman, the challenge was as much for the actor to line up his performance. This hurdle was avoided in 1989's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where motion-controlled puppets of a rapidly aging Donovan repeated the same movements exactly, allowing for this incredible change. That sequence even seems to have a visual nod to Strasser's work with filters. Right at the start through editing, I think it looks reminiscent of those original transformations. Theoden wasn't the first age-changing effect shown on screen. Movies like Titanic morphed Kate Winslet into her older self as portrayed by Gloria Stewart. And in Saving Private Ryan, we see a similar transition as young Matt Damon becomes old Harrison Young. I feel like there's a joke there somewhere. Okay, I've already mentioned the Twilight Zone once in this video, but while researching aging techniques, we came across this episode. They're using the colour filter technique created by Karl Struss. This was in 1960 or around that time at least, which makes me think it must have been in common use from the 30s to the 60s. But no, not necessarily. George T. Clemens was the director of photography for this episode. And if you check his credits, he was the camera assistant on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1931. He almost certainly saw what was involved and then resurrected the technique 3 decades later. Aging transitions, like other transformations, have used all the same tricks throughout cinema that we've already seen. But it is worth mentioning one VFX company, one that specialises in de-aging, and who was a closely guarded secret until 2006's X-Men: The Last Stand. Lola VFX had spent several years prior to that movie working in the shadows, performing digital wrinkle removal. Using reference footage, advice from cosmetic surgeons, and tools like Photoshop, face tracking software, and morphing, Hollywood stars could have years shaved off their appearance. One fascinating element about all this is Lola VFX have always claimed it is their artistry that pulls off digitally youthing a character. And that may well be the case. When they are not used, attempts by other FX companies produce shockingly poor results that pull you out of the scene. At the start of this video, I pretended that movies couldn't pull off transformations without the use of computers. Clearly just comment baiting. And I hope I've proved that as long as there have been movies, There have been innovators coming up with new ways to wow and shock their audiences.
CGI in itself is neither good nor bad. While I'm sure some of you will have seen the clips presented here as evidence that movies are better without CGI, the truth is computers are just another tool for filmmakers. They add flexibility to the creative process. Transformations are magic tricks, and the best magicians use every trick at their disposal to fool you, from misdirection to lighting to mirrors, which we'll be looking at in the next video in this series.